I'm Ryan Grove. This is my wife Tiffany. We've been talking about alternative narratives other than the conventional history given to us in orthodox schools and universities and history books. This whole time I've been coming up with all these crazy conspiracy theories, and obviously I'm no expert in any field, but I feel that talking about them is totally appropriate by somebody like me, because I think that I fall in the class of masses, and I think that that there are a lot of mistruths and a lot of misinformation that is shoveled or force-fed to the masses, for some reason or another. And if more people just had conversations about this stuff, especially with the magic of the internet, that we could get stuff figured out and actually maybe come closer to understanding what actually is true and what is just propaganda. My wife has taken she's taken the road where she, rather than just form an opinion right away on these conspiracies that she's not familiar with, I've noticed in the last few days that she's been going back and restudying textbook history, and actually that's a pretty smart move, and it's one that I should.
Not necessarily textbook history, because that varies even within like a 5 to 10 year time span.
Oh yeah, sure. There are variations within conventional Orthodox history. However, you've gone to you've been looking at like documentaries that support a conventional. They don't mention anything conspiratorial or alternative.
The Tatarian mud flood theory was within 1,000 years ago.
All I claimed was that
I wanted to go back and see what was happening.
That's good. That's good. But all I claimed was that someone says that, and so I'm just bringing that question or that possibility to the forefront. I don't have any claims, just to be clear. So anyway, what kind of information?
The Bronze Age is from 1500
BC.
to 1180 BC.
BC, yeah.
And so at about 1200 BC, you're nearing the end of the Bronze Age. But the Sea People attack Ramses II's dynasty and Ramses III, Merneptah, and leave it less populated and in ruin, and the trade routes collapse for a few hundred years.
So
and it's the end of an age. Ugarit, which is modern day Syria, just totally collapsed, even though it was really a supposedly a grand city, and it was called once the Venice of the Bronze Age world.
Did it collapse because of the invasion by the Sea People of Egypt?
Partially. There
Egypt
was also
paramount
some
to the trade.
Like interior contributors, like the Mycenaeans and
they're in the interior
Sardinians.
of what? Were they the interior of Egyptian
the
Empire?
The island area where Sardinia and the Greek islands are.
Sardinia is what, the boot of Italy.
And then if you extrapolate out right to the side, but if you extrapolate out behind Greece, there's this time between 3200 to 1050 BC called the Cycladic culture, said to be built by Cyclops.
I believe that.
Mythologies. But those are even further out islands. And they say that when Mycenae collapsed, that they thought maybe they sailed out to some of those islands where they'd sprung from, or maybe they came back into, like you were saying, Italy or...
Well, it seems to me that the Bronze Age is a time where there was a huge population boom globally, because of all of the things that were now available to people of the world because of the innovations through bronze. and that if you take the narrative where giants are actually
Well,
real,
they have
that giants
cuneiform
were on the
tablets
outs, and
telling the
so
story.
perhaps at this point giants were starting to move to islands and moving to the colder regions
Well, there was crop
as a
failure at
retreat
that time,
from
lots
humans.
of decadence on the coasts. People began to abandon cities, though, on the coast and move inland because of the incursion by these sea people
Who are these sea people?
who are split into
Are
7 to 9 tribes. And uh,
the sea people are?
yeah, and this is addressed later, but uh, the main area that they needed to capture was Babylon because it would cut off the king's access to the tin needed to process bronze. So, like the Egyptian king, and there was some other kings in that
And the
region.
Mycenaean kings and the Cretan kings, they all needed what Babylon had in order to keep their bronze manufacturing going. Is that what you're saying?
Well, some of those, yes. And there was an old king of Elam, which was right under Babylon, and he helped destroy it. He helped the sea people invade them by giving them an opening, and it cut Greece and Egypt off from their necessary routes. That's kind of why trade
Okay.
collapsed a little.
Okay.
And armies of Roman infantry figured out how to destroy chariot warriors.
The
And
Romans.
about that time too.
Well,
Yeah,
Rome,
old Rome.
like the Etruscans,
Yeah.
because Rome didn't come into existence until about 1,000. Well,
Well, this is 1180.
right. So 1,000 years later, before Rome was really starting to kick in,
Right.
ish.
The systems collapsed, disaster on a massive scale, famine, drought, development of desert terrain, earthquakes create mass population migration. But there were no earthquakes in Egypt. Cyprus was still fertile, though. Um, one mention in all of this is that iron was first used in 3000 BC, but not used in abundance. Iron was more commonly available, though harder to process than once they figured it out. You know, so.
That's the beginning of Rome proper, is the switch from bronze to iron.
But the Hittites and the Mycenaeans fought for centuries. They were kind of border skirmishes. Um,
Like
and
in
Homer,
Turkey, yeah. Now, like Troy would be at the crossroads between those
right.
clashes and stuff.
And Homer,
Sure.
Odysseus makes this journey, this 10-year journey, before the collapse of the Hittites and the Mycenaeans. And he goes to Crete, Egypt, Lebanon, Libya, before returning to Ithaca, finding it in upheaval. Oh, it says 9 bows raised against Egyptians, so there were 9
Kingdoms.
outer people that were attacking the Egyptians, and some of those were sea people, but they said some of them were probably interior countries.
Did you find anything about any justifications for how I'm obsessed with this, of course, because this feature of alternative history has to be reconciled somehow, and that's this amazing construction of like the pyramids of Giza, for instance, or all these megalithic structures that I keep going on and on about. Did you find any hints or any justifications for these ancient people having the capacity to build these things? Just out
No,
of
I
curiosity.
haven't looked into that at all, but I did find out that Upper Egypt at the towards the end of the Bronze Age was Karnak, and Sardinia, they're the Nuragi builders.
I don't know what Niragi.
They have circular stone buildings, 2 millennia BC. That they may have been able to work iron and also had access to bronze.
So they were doing
And
iron
they
2000
have
BC.
statuary and
That's
horned
advanced.
helmets and round studded shields, similar to Egyptian renderings of the sea people and some of the Egyptian writings. So that's why they think maybe
The
Sardinia.
Vikings had the small round shields too, by the way. And they're sea people. Just throwing it out there.
Right, and they needed tin to produce bronze, and so if Egypt was cut off from Afghanistan by the collapse of Babylon, then uh, if Sardinia could produce bronze, then they had an advantage at that time.
Were they able to ever?
Well, they did. Cyprus, Crete, and Greece all have items originating in Sardinia.
Huh, cool. You were,
They also have the adoration of the bull, similar to Aegean mythos or whatever.
Greek mythology.
Hmm.
You were looking up, I don't know if you did, I heard Prester John, and that would be interesting, but you were looking up Travels of Marco Polo.
No, I didn't. I had read that years ago. I don't remember much from it. I just remember him floating down, meeting all kinds of odd people.
Wait, I think you're talking about Huck Finn there.
No, no,
I'm just
it's
teasing you.
Marco
I'm teasing
Polo.
you. I'm teasing you.
It's a biography of Marco Polo.
Cool. Well, let's talk about Galen Windsor. Do you want to, or you want to save that for another time? Take his silence as a yes. Galen Windsor, after World War II, he was in the Navy. After the war was over, 1945.
Oh, I just want to point out lastly, so before we forget, that 1600
It's
to
rude.
1100 BC, Mycenaea, Greece, there was colossal masonry. It's the late Bronze Age, and it is also Homer's era of the Trojan War. Is that a half-remembered recollection of, real events? And
I think conventional history
Mycenae
treats
and the
them as more or
Hittites
less
go out of
real events.
history kind of together at the same time. All right, go ahead with what you were going to say.
I was just trying to fill in the dead air.
Mm-hmm.
But Galen Windsor
Mm-hmm.
was being shipped to Japan right before the dropping of the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he thought he was going to have to invade, be part of the invasion group. And so he was acutely interested in this technology that ended the war and allowed him to go back home. And he thought, I'm going to go into chemistry and physics. So, 1946, he went to college and he got a degree in chemistry and with a huge emphasis on physics. And he was picked to be part of this new atomic energy part of the government that was developing since the development of the atomic and the
Plutonium
and uranium. Actually, both bombs were different. They were two different tests. And I've since you just pushed me down this little trail here, there's a lot of scholarship that suggests that us dropping those two bombs was absolutely unnecessary. I remember being in history class, and my history teacher, like back in the breakdancing days, if you wore a bandana that had like the American flag on it or disrespected the American flag in any way, he would just fly off the handle. He'd be enraged. And in his class, he said, look, either, these estimates of an American invasion of Japan would result in perhaps a million plus casualties because they were so well defended and had bunkers and tunnels, and he said you could either do that and sacrifice the lives of a million plus American GIs, or you could just drop the bombs, kill a fraction of those many Japanese, and end the war. And that was his justification for it.
What's that? Oh, it's a squirrel.
With one of your apples.
Yeah.
And that it turns out that the minute Russia, the Soviet Union, decided to enter the Pacific arena, Japan had already decided that it was probably going to be forced to surrender.
Capitulate.
And the historical narrative is that we dropped, you know, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 3 days separated from each other, and then just a week or two later, then Japan said, "Oh, we capitulate, we surrender," and etc. However, Japan had already given hints that they were trying to find some tenable way to communicate a surrender to their population, and they were trying to find a way to surrender. They were already in the works. Surrender was already in the works.
Of course,
and so,
the
United States knew that, and so they did it anyway.
I'm sure.
Primarily to experiment on this new technology in real-time warfare action. They probably didn't want the Japanese to surrender until after they did that,
Of course.
so they could have a justifiable excuse for using that kind of technology. I don't know. Remember Douglas Dietrich? This is a wild claim, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but this gentleman went on podcasts and had done a bunch of research, and he alleges that the United States had 200,000 plus Japanese prisoners of war at the end of the war, and they were keeping them somewhere in Nevada, somewhere in the desert, at a secret concentration
Area
camp.
51.
And we had just come up with a hydrogen bomb, and we thought, man, we had such a great opportunity.
Sure, we tested it on them.
We had such a great opportunity during wartime to justifiably test, these first two bombs. Too bad we don't have, that kind of population concentration that we could test a hydrogen bomb on. And of course, we know that in 1940 America, even pop culture was exceedingly racist. You look at Looney Tunes or movies and all that, it's very, very, very racist. So it's not too far of a stretch of the imagination to assume that these prejudices were deeply rooted in the psyche of America at that time. And so these Americans who just fought this bloody, terrible war and had their friends killed and had a really strong anti-Japanese sentiment, that they decided to test this new hydrogen bomb on 200,000 Japanese prisoners of war that they never intended to actually release and send back to Japan. And that Area 51 was created as a
place to conceal the
hiding spot. And they threw up the costume and the disguise of aliens. That was all invented to justify them keeping it top secret lockdown. We can't talk about it, so that no one would ever go in and find out what a terrible war crime we did when we did this. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea. It's just something I heard. But interesting, Galen Windsor.
Also, though, I would point out that people always try to make the Asian folks the bad guys, but a lot of times they came into neighborhoods that white entrepreneurs didn't go into, and they created a place where people could buy affordable goods, and they were really good grocers. So, and people were willing to hide them for that, because you love your grocer or your florist.
Well, without any kind of context, that sounds like a really racist kind of thing to say, because that's the contribution that we can be most grateful for to them, when clearly they've obviously contributed
to the railroads.
All aspects
I'm just
of
saying
human development, even better than white people or something.
I think you said something about groceries. I don't know. Anyways, let's go on.
All right. You have something to say?
No, not at all.
Okay. So Galen Windsor, he became part of the nuclear power program, and developing nuclear power plants, etc. He even designed some facilities. His key role was testing, measuring the radioactivity of inventory that the United States government had.
All that.
Yeah, he was in it. And in the 40s and early 50s, while he was working with uranium and plutonium, he was handling it in his hands
It did burn their clothes a little bit.
Well, okay, here's the thing, is that once it's been enriched to a certain level, if you get too much material that's charged come into accidental contact with one another, you can achieve a critical mass. And that would cause a blue flash of intense radiation, and it's just a matter of time before the person who's been exposed to that would die. Sometimes it would take a few days, and sometimes it would take a month, but it wasn't long. And he said that there had only been, I don't know, like a couple dozen people that this had ever happened to.
This is not looking good so far.
And
then.
Only 8 people had actually ever died from it. But that's critical. But he said that in these power plants, these are the people that had the critical, that accidentally caused critical mass and been exposed. Were primarily working on what the weapon aspect of it.
Weaponized.
Yes.
Plutonium.
And he says that the grades that they use in nuclear power plants, and the way that the material is handled, is that it's just impossible that you could cause a critical mass event.
I do believe, if I'm not wrong, that uranium is the byproduct of plutonium, and that it is initially just plutonium.
And
then,
uranium is the father of radium.
Well, you
By the
got
way.
that all wrong when you said radium was harmless, because that one guy's jaw fell off because he drank that radium drink
Every
day, and then his whole body rotted from the inside out. And that's not the only example.
I know, but then we have the radium girl that lived to be 107, so that's not conclusive. It's likely,
Can you
but that
sound
is
like
not
the
conclusive.
lawyers that try to pretend like their chemicals didn't?
Look, I have no stake in any of this. I'm just trying to share.
That's how they do. They're like, you can't prove it because one person survived.
Well, you know why
But
they do that all the
basically,
time?
That lady said that she didn't work that
it.
much because she got pregnant and she quit working there, but her
So Galen Windsor,
niece or aunt or whatever kept working there. That's why she got sick.
Galen Windsor, he said, like in the 60s, then suddenly the government, you know, he worked 15 years for GE and making these power plants, and he's happy. He said suddenly there was these strange regulations that the government was beginning to impose on
OSHA.
on how you know, like how much exposure time and how much exposure is permissible, you know, these tightening of the rules. And he began to question them, and as he began to question them, he realized it was a shut up, do as you say, or do as I say, and he wasn't being satisfied. So throughout his experience, he increasingly began to think, well, man, what's up with this? What's up with this? And he had the audacity to actually regularly go swimming in the reactor water that they use to cool down, you know, the uranium, the plutonium after it's been used. He went swimming in it, and it glowed white blue.
Boys tell out of school.
He even took a big jug of water and set it on his desk, and he drank a drink of it every day to show people that.
Yeah, drink your uranium water, guys.
Okay, look, and then I saw, you know, you can watch his lectures, because in the 80s he was like hell-bent on exposing this, and he was making a series of lectures. And during one of his lectures, he took some uranium, rubbed it on his hand. He had a Geiger counter, and it was like went off the charts, whatever. And then he went licked it off, and nothing happened.
Okay.
He said that. Let me conclude before you cut me off, because none of this will make sense without a conclusion. Okay, and then I'll totally give you time to talk.
Please do.
So in a nutshell, what he was claiming was that the United States began to realize that people had a fear of nuclear energy, and the radium and the plutonium was just super valuable, super valuable.
It's not radium. It's plutonium.
I mean plutonium and radium. Yes. I'm sorry, but when you keep interrupting me, I start getting scattered thoughts,
I'm sorry.
and I can't focus. Okay. But so they thought they apparently began to think that if people were scared of this, and they put all this government security facade about, you know, and cautionary apparatus up to prevent people from getting hurt, that no one would ever think that they would be able to steal their inventory, not employees and not agents from other countries. And of course, this material is the livelihood, it's the supreme element of American power.
Okay.
having nuclear weapons. So, and that's one thing. The other thing is that then suddenly in the 80s they came up with this waste disposal. He said there is no waste. He said you can re-enrich spent uranium and plutonium and use it again. And what they call the byproduct of this process of nuclear power, that can actually be used for it can be totally reused for other sources of energy. And that this water that they put in these yellow barrels with that radiation sign.
And they say profiteers are selling it to the Russians, etc.
Actually,
how it works.
Actually, in the 40s, he had he was part of the Navy intelligence, and he had documents come across his desk that showed that the United States,
his girlfriend, the blonde that he met,
free, turned out to be his wife. It was free of charge. They were just sending nuclear material and nuclear information to Soviet Union as early as 1947, just for free. So anyway, that's something to think about. I don't know what conclusion, but let me
when
finish.
The
I'm so
nuclear bomb
close.
hit, if that isn't poisonous, then why did everyone get sick? Why did everyone die and burn?
Everyone died and burned. Okay, let me finish. Let me finish the Galen
bomb.
Windsor part, and then I will address
Okay.
this. He said that in the early 1980s, Congress passed legislation that designated certain states as waste disposal sites, and they have this big elaborate system of putting these barrels of toxic nuclear waste underground.
Yes.
And he said, and when he was asked, well, what do you think are in those? He said nothing. He said there's probably dead bodies. He said it's probably knives and guns and all kinds of evidences out there for all this nefarious stuff that the corrupt elements of the United States government would like to hide. And they have the absolute protection of the United States under the auspices of nuclear safety. And I don't know, he said it. He's the pro. He was the leading expert on nuclear power in the 1950s and the 60s and half the 70s.
Dying.
Okay, now nuclear blast is not nuclear power as far as energy creation.
Not.
That's
nuclear
that's
fission,
where you take
fusion.
You remember, it's fission. Fusion, we want to get that someday, but it's always, no matter what time period you hear people predict.
We want cold fusion. I understand. Just one.
So fission is when you get two pieces of super radioactive elements that can achieve critical mass. You put them in a bomb, and on impact, the bomb forces them to go into critical mass. It creates one of those blue flashes that I was talking about before, which kill scientists in a few days. Now that is real, and that you critical mass that on a mass population, you're going to get a lot of casualties. But the thing that blows buildings up and incinerates people is the amount of heat that this blue flash creates in the atmosphere, and that heat is what pushes and blows out. Now, if you can avoid that initial flash, you don't have to worry about radiation. You do have to worry about the pyroclasmic blast that follows. And if you survive that, there's not going to be residual radiation. And now, okay, now you can talk.
Do you find
I'm sorry, that had to be argued.
Deformed children for generations afterward?
Okay, take Chernobyl, for instance. Now, there were 600 kids. Okay, this is the only documented case of Fukushima. Yeah, there aren't any in Fukushima. No one has developed any radioactive problems,
because
medical
so
problems from
many scientists get
Fukushima.
money to test that region, right?
Chernobyl, there were 600 kids that developed a terrible thyroid problem, but only 18 out of the 600 actually succumbed to it fatally, and
He wasn't a psychology major.
It was
or a history major, apparently.
It was further revealed that the children in that area had been given contaminated milk that was contaminated with iodine, and that. But the people that worked on it, I mean, the people around it, and for generations to come. There haven't been generational mutations or anything that came from Chernobyl. 3 Mile Island, when that occurred, that meltdown, Jimmy Carter was there in a week or two on location making a speech, and people can go there now, and there are no cases of anyone especially generationally being affected or negatively impacted through generational mutations
But
or anything like that.
that's nuclear power plant leaks where your buddy Galen Windsor said that a lot of times
I
those
wish he was my buddy.
meltdowns
Cool.
seal themselves off because they create kind of a glass wall because of the heat they generate, along with the minerals that are in the.
No, they do create a lot of heat. That's why they use them to make
And
steam, to turn the
actually,
turbines, to generate electricity.
I've watched
And you
a
need protection from that.
documentary about
But
the
radiation hazard
wolves of
might not be.
Chernobyl, and they are actually doing well and not severely affected. But we know that, well,
What? I'm waiting.
there were a lot of repercussions.
This is our fighty episode. Let's
Oh.
make it more dramatic.
It is not fighty.
You had to interrupt me, but then when I stopped and let you talk, then you got nothing.
Well, it's just weird. It's almost like I feel like you almost want to be a Holocaust denier or something.
We'll save that judgment for if I actually cross that line ever.
Right, okay.
All right, anyway, that was fun. I'm going to make another video soon. Galen Windsor, look it up.